Merry Christmas, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. You know what's pretty fascinating? We're diving into the story of Singapore today.
Singapore.
Yeah. You know how it went from facing some serious challenges back in 1965 to becoming one of the most successful countries in the world?
Ah, right. Fascinating story.
Seriously. We've got a stack of info to go through, mostly from that Dhruv Rathi YouTube video you mentioned. Singapore is 18 times more densely populated than India.
Wow, really?
Yeah, but they've still managed to create a thriving society. It's crazy. So picture this, 1965. Singapore is just separated from Malaysia, dealing with poverty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unemployment, crime, you name it. But fast forward a few decades and bam, it's a global economic powerhouse.
How did they do it?
That's what we're going to find out. But first, we have to go way back, understand a bit of the historical context.
Okay.
Singapore has always been a strategic trading hub, right? Influenced by all sorts of traders.
Well, cool.
All, Malay, Thai, Indian, Arab, Japanese, Chinese, real melting pot of cultures.
And that shaped their multicultural identity.
Exactly. And speaking of origins, did you know Singapore actually comes from Sanskrit?
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. It means Lion City.
Wow, fitting. Kind of like a lion, huh? Rising up.
It's one of the 4 Asian tigers,
Oh, right. The tag.
alongside South Korea, Hong Kong, and Taiwan.
All high population density.
But all economic powerhouses. See, high population doesn't have to mean economic hardship.
Right. These tiger economies prove that. Strong leadership, strategic planning, it can really make a difference.
Okay, so now let's jump back to 1965. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's first prime minister.
Yeah.
Tough challenges. But he wasn't afraid of bold decisions,
Yeah.
like founding ASEAN,
Aussie.
the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. He knew Singapore's success depended on regional stability. Smart, looking beyond just internal issues.
Totally. He was playing the long game. And then there's national service.
National service.
Mandatory military service for all young men, it was controversial.
I bet.
But Lee Kuan Yew wanted a strong defense force. Self-reliant, even though at the time the British were still providing security.
Wow, so he was thinking long-term. Knew Singapore needed to be able to defend itself.
Yeah.
So proactive. What about education? Was that part of his vision too?
Absolutely. Education, cornerstone of his strategy. High-quality public education.
Nice.
For everyone. But here's the thing. They didn't just focus on academics.
Really?
They emphasized vocational training, too. Practical skills, for the workforce.
That's interesting. So different from a lot of places that prioritize those university degrees.
It was strategic. They needed a skilled workforce to support those economic ambitions.
Ah, I see. Build a nation that could manufacture, innovate, not just import.
Exactly. They needed skilled labor to make that happen.
Okay, strong economy, secure nation. But what about the people? Singapore is incredibly diverse. How do you build a harmonious society out of so many different ethnicities and religions?
Right. Lee Kuan Yew, he envisioned a truly secular nation, everyone equal, no matter their background.
Okay, but how do they actually put that into practice?
Well, look at the ethnic integration policy, for instance.
Okay.
They mandated a specific ethnic mix in public housing blocks.
Oh, really?
It prevented those ethnic enclaves from forming, encouraged interaction between communities.
It's like they engineered diversity.
And it wasn't just housing. Things like Racial Harmony Day, too.
What's that?
School children, they learn about each other's cultures, celebrate differences.
Wow. So it's not just about tolerance. It's about understanding, appreciation. Did that actually work?
Well, Singapore has a low crime rate, very little ethnic tension, building that shared identity. It seems to have strengthened the nation.
That's pretty inspiring, actually. We often hear about the struggles of multicultural societies.
Right.
But Singapore seems to have found a way, at least to some extent.
It's an ongoing process, but they've made remarkable progress. And it kind of leads us to another fascinating part of Lee Kuan Yew's vision,
Right.
his emphasis on cleanliness.
Cleanliness, really. You wouldn't think that'd be top of mind with all those other challenges.
Oh, right. But he believed it was a sign of a civilized society. He launched the Keep Singapore Clean campaign. And they didn't just talk about it, they actually did something.
Like what?
They licensed waste collectors, introduced recycling bins, built public toilets, but like high standards.
Okay, so they were serious about it. More than just words. But was it just about, like, aesthetics?
It went beyond just looking good. It improved public health, reduced diseases, boosted tourism. It fostered a sense of civic pride. People started taking ownership of their environment.
So it's not just about a clean city, it's about building a more responsible citizenry. It's kind of cool how all these seemingly separate policies kind of work together.
Yeah, they reinforce each other. It was very strategic.
Lee Kuan Yew was a master strategist, understood that building a successful nation, it takes a holistic approach, multiple fronts, creating this like upward spiral of progress. And that brings us to the next chapter, how they tackled the slums.
Slums.
Yeah, and how they transformed their housing landscape.
Oh, right. The contrast between those 1965 slums and the public housing they have now. It's really remarkable. 80% of the population lives in public housing now. Minimal homelessness.
That's incredible. So how did they go from slums to, a nation where most people live in modern housing?
Well, the government, they took a multi-pronged approach. They started relocating families from those slums, started constructing high-rise public housing units with basic amenities, water, electricity, sanitation.
That's a huge project, especially with limited land in Singapore.
It took meticulous planning, efficient execution. They knew providing decent housing was essential for social stability and economic progress.
Makes sense. But they didn't just focus on quantity, right? What about the quality of life in these places?
They included some smart design elements. These HDB estates, they're often self-contained communities. Schools, shops, parks, all within walking distance.
Oh, that's smart. Reduces reliance on cars.
Exactly. It aligns with that whole strategy of discouraging private car ownership. And yeah, the architecture might seem uniform to some, but these buildings, they provided a massive upgrade in living standards for millions.
Right. It's all about perspective. Way better than those cramped slums.
And that commitment to affordable housing, it has had a huge impact on homelessness. While it hasn't been completely eradicated, it's remarkably low.
I remember reading that in 2021, only 616 people were reported as sleeping on the streets. That's unbelievable for a city like Singapore. How do they do it?
Well, it's the robust public housing program, those social safety nets, targeted assistance for people at risk. And well, they also have those strict laws against things like vagrancy and begging.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely something we should explore further.
For sure. Raises questions about the balance between order and individual freedom.
For sure. But right now, I have to ask, how do they pay for all of this? Education, housing, defense, cleanliness? Didn't all of this have a huge price tag?
You'd think so, right? But surprisingly, Singapore, they actually have fairly low income tax rates.
Wait, seriously, how?
Fiscal discipline, smart investments, and get this, revenue from government-owned businesses.
Government-owned business, isn't that usually a recipe for, like, inefficiency and bureaucracy?
Not in Singapore. They have companies like Temasek Holdings.
Temasek Holdings.
It's a government-owned investment company, massive portfolio. They generate billions in revenue.
So it's not your typical bloated state-owned enterprise. How do they make it work?
They're run efficiently, transparently, focused on that long-term value creation.
Right.
It really challenges a lot of those assumptions about government's role in the economy.
Yeah, it flips the script on that whole government can't run a business thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
This approach has been huge for Singapore's financial success.
Okay, so we've talked about Lee Kuan Yew's vision, the bold policies, the financial strategies. But what about the man himself? Did he become like a national icon? Statues, monuments?
It's funny you should ask that. Lee Kuan Yew, he actually avoided creating a personality cult.
Really?
He focused on building strong institutions. Institutions that would last, so you won't find any big statues or monuments dedicated to him in Singapore.
Huh. That was pretty unique. Most leaders with that kind of impact, their image would be everywhere. What was his thinking?
He knew Singapore's success couldn't depend on one person. He wanted to create a system bigger than himself, a system that would keep working even when he was gone.
Thinking generations ahead. Not about the short-term glory. He was building a legacy.
Exactly. But we have to acknowledge Lee Kuan Yew's legacy is, well, complicated. He achieved incredible progress, but his way of governing, it was often authoritarian. He restricted free speech, controlled media.
Right. There's that other side to this story. Achievements are impressive, but they came at a cost to some freedoms. Tough balance.
Yeah. It brings up those big questions about development and liberty. They're still being debated today.
We'll definitely have to dig into those questions more as we go. But right now, I'm struck by just how ambitious and strategic they were in building modern Singapore. So we just finished talking about Lee Kuan Yew's complicated legacy. But let's go back to Singapore's public housing for a bit. Most citizens live in those HDB flats, right?
Right.
But how does that whole system actually work?
Well, it's the Housing and Development Board, the HDB.
The HDB.
They're the ones behind it all.
Oh, okay.
They don't just build apartments, they build entire communities.
So it's about more than just shelter.
It's about affordability.
Okay.
Self-sufficiency, too. These HDB flats, they're sold at subsidized prices.
Subsidized.
Way below market value. So home ownership, it's possible for a lot of people.
That's a huge difference from a lot of cities. It's getting so hard to afford a home these days.
It's a choice. They're committed to social equity, stability. Secure and affordable housing, it's essential for a strong society.
I see. Affordability is key. But what about, like, the actual quality of life in these HDB estates? Are they nice places to live?
Well, they think a lot about design and planning. Most estates have schools, shops, parks, all within walking distance.
That's convenient.
Yeah, you don't need to rely on cars as much.
Fits with their whole transportation thing, right?
Totally. And yeah, the architecture, it can seem a bit uniform, but it's still a huge improvement from those slums they replace.
I mean, that's important, right? Perspective. It's better than a slum. Even with this amazing housing program, I imagine some people still slip through the cracks. Do they have a homeless problem in Singapore?
Homelessness isn't totally gone, but it's really low compared to other cities. Remember we said only about 600 people were sleeping on the streets in 2021?
Right, I remember. How do they keep those numbers so low?
It's a combination of things. The public housing, social safety nets, and helping those at risk.
Okay.
And while there are those strict laws about vagrancy and begging.
Yeah. Goes back to what we were talking about before, right?
Right.
That balance between freedom and order. Seems like Singapore's chosen order. Even if it means restricting some personal freedoms, we should definitely explore that more later.
Definitely.
But for now, the transportation system, the whole most expensive car in the world thing, I still can't get over that.
The Certificate of Entitlement System, the COE.
COE.
It's a great example of how they use market forces to meet their goals.
Okay, break that down for me. How does it work?
Owning a car in Singapore, it's not like other places. You don't just buy the car.
Right.
You have to bid on a COE.
COE. What's
That's the permit to own and use a car for a certain time, usually 10 years.
So like a limited edition license to own a car.
Exactly. The government, they control how many COEs are issued each month.
To limit the number of cars on the road.
Exactly. Supply and demand, right?
So these COEs get really expensive.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes they cost even more than the car itself.
Wow, that's wild. No wonder people don't buy cars there. But what if you need a car?
Like,
You know, like if you have a disability
oh, yeah.
or a family that lives far from public transportation.
There are different types of COEs. Some are cheaper than others.
Oh, okay.
The government adjusts those quotas sometimes, depending on things like the economy or new infrastructure.
I see.
But the whole point is to make car ownership a luxury.
Not a need.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a really bold approach. So what happens when your COE expires? Do you just have to, like, get rid of your car?
You can renew it, but it's pricey.
Makes sense.
So most people just deregister the car.
To help keep the car population down.
Right. It means most cars on the road are pretty new.
And fuel efficient, probably.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ugh.
This whole system is fascinating. They've engineered it so well to manage traffic and, encourage people to use public transportation. It seems extreme, but it's working.
They're not afraid to try unconventional solutions.
Speaking of bold solutions, let's talk about how they funded all this. The housing, education, transportation, they must have taxed everyone a ton, right?
Nope. Singapore actually has pretty low income tax rates.
Are you serious? How? How did they pay for all of this?
It's all about being pragmatic, disciplined,
Okay.
thinking long term, sustainable growth over short-term wins.
That sounds good in theory, but how does it work practically?
One principle is being really careful with spending,
What do you mean?
keeping a balanced budget, not borrowing or spending too much.
I see.
It means making tough decisions, prioritizing.
That can't be easy.
It isn't.
So how did they decide what to prioritize?
Things with long-term returns. Education, infrastructure, research, things like that. They also really focus on efficiency and getting rid of corruption.
It's not just how much they spend, but how they spend it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And don't forget about the revenue from those government-owned businesses we talked about.
Oh, right. Temasek Holdings.
They bring in a lot of money for the government.
And they reinvest that money back into services and infrastructure. It's pretty amazing. They've really turned the idea of state-owned enterprises on its head. They're not inefficient or bureaucratic. They're actually contributing to the country's development. But haven't they also gotten some flack for being too involved in the economy?
That's a good point.
Where do you draw the line between investing strategically and stifling private companies?
It's a valid question.
Yeah.
Their approach is definitely more hands-on than, say, a completely free market
They want to guide the market.
for their goals. Yeah.
So it's not just a black and white thing.
Yeah.
Government good, government bad.
Right.
It's finding that balance between public and private.
Exactly. They're always evaluating and
Adapting
keeping things up to date,
to stay effective.
which is crucial in today's world, right? Things change so fast. We've covered so much. Housing, transportation, the economy, government's role.
Yeah, we have.
Singapore's approach to development, it's multifaceted.
It's complex. Absolutely. And while there are definitely things to critique, there's no question they've accomplished something remarkable. But before we finish this section, I'm curious about the social and cultural side. How did they keep everyone united amidst all that economic growth?
That's a great question, and one we'll tackle in part 3.
Okay, so back to Singapore. We've been talking about how they went from struggling nation to global success story. You know, those pragmatic policies, the economic stuff. But we can't forget about the people.
Right.
How do they actually build a strong society with all those changes happening?
It's a great point. All the economic success in the world doesn't mean much if people aren't happy, right? And Singapore's so diverse, it's amazing they've managed to create such a strong national identity.
Exactly. Remember we talked about the ethnic integration policy for housing?
Yeah.
That's practical. But what about culture? Do they have to, like, sacrifice cultural diversity to create that national identity?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance. But I think Singapore has actually managed to preserve its multicultural heritage while also fostering a strong sense of, being Singaporean.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How did they do that?
Well, one key is education.
Education.
Yeah. From a young age, kids are taught about all the different ethnic groups.
Ah, I see. So understanding starts early on.
Right. And it's not just about what they learn in school. Throughout the year, they have all these celebrations. Chinese New Year, Diwali, Hari Raya, Christmas.
So they're not trying to eliminate those differences. They're embracing them.
Exactly. It's part of what makes Singapore unique.
Does it actually work? I mean, does it really make for a more harmonious society?
Well, Singapore has a super low crime rate, almost no ethnic conflict. That says something, right?
Yeah, especially given their history.
Yeah.
But we have to acknowledge the other side of the coin, too. We talked about those restrictions on certain freedoms, like freedom of speech and the press. How do those play out in everyday life?
It's true. Singapore's government really values order and stability. Sometimes it comes at the cost of individual freedoms. They do keep tight control of the media. And there are strict laws against anything that could, disrupt social harmony.
It's that age-old debate, security versus freedom.
Right. Some people would argue that given Singapore's unique situation, being a small nation surrounded by bigger powers, it makes sense for them to be more receptive.
Yeah, and others would say that certain rights are just, fundamental.
Exactly. It's complicated, no easy answers, but it's important to consider both sides.
Okay, so what about quality of life? Is Singapore a good place to live?
Well, they always rank high in those global surveys. Safety, healthcare, education, infrastructure. And let's not forget their public transportation. It's world class, their streets are clean, safe. And their healthcare system, it's pretty amazing.
Sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah.
But isn't it crazy expensive to live there?
Some things can be pricey, housing, cars, things like that. But salaries are higher too.
Okay.
And the government helps with things like healthcare and education.
So everyone has access.
Right.
So it's a trade-off. High cost, but high reward.
I guess you could say that. But surveys show people are generally happy there, satisfied with public services, safety, just overall happy.
That's great. But no place is perfect.
All right.
What are some of the challenges Singapore is facing? Can they keep this going?
Well, nobody can escape global issues,
Climate.
change, economic shifts, things like that. Plus, they're a small island nation.
Right.
They're also dealing with an aging population and a shrinking workforce.
Yeah, I can see how that would put a strain on things.
It puts pressure on social safety nets and economic growth.
So some big hurdles. What's their plan to deal with all this?
They're putting a lot of effort into research and innovation.
Just stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, they're trying to become leaders in things like technology, sustainability, healthcare. They're also trying to boost productivity, attract talent from other countries to help with that workforce issue.
Smart. So they're not just sitting back.
Definitely not. They're actively thinking ahead. adapting to new challenges.
It sounds like Singapore's story is still unfolding. They've come such a long way, but they're not done yet. It's kind of inspiring.
It really is. Their journey shows us there's no magic formula for success. But with good planning, leadership, and a focus on people's well-being, any nation, even a small one, can achieve amazing things.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Singapore, I'm amazed by everything they've done, and I'm definitely going to be thinking about what other countries can learn from them.
It's definitely a story worth thinking about. Hopefully this deep dive has given you some new insights and a better understanding of what makes Singapore so successful.
And with that, happy holidays, everyone. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.